Hi, I'm John DeDakis. I'm a writing coach, a manuscript editor, a novelist, and a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. You're one to one with me, and I'm one to one with Pamela Fullerton. She's a short story writer. She just has a collection of short stories out. She's very gifted, and I've been looking forward to talking to her. Pamela, welcome.
Well, welcome to you, John. Welcome back to your old stomping grounds.
Exactly, Wisconsin. I grew up in La Crosse, and you are right. Are you right now in Wausau or in rural, right
I'm
outside of
about
Wausau?
10 miles northwest of Wausau.
Okay, and so you have a collection of short stories out. Let me bring it up and show it to people. It's called Red Road Redemption, and tell us a little bit about the stories that are in there.
The stories in Red Road Redemption are about the lives that are lived along those iconic red gravel roads, those red granite roads in Marathon, Lincoln, Clark County, and basically in the central part of Wisconsin. And they are about the lives that were being lived in as small family farms and family farm families were kind of going extinct. So these are lives that were being lived even as people were losing a way of life that they had lived for generations around these red roads.
And I would imagine that the stories have universal themes that would relate to people in Ohio and South Dakota or wherever farms are, right?
Absolutely, because every time I would open up one of the community newspapers when I first moved into the area and would see one more auction notice, it wasn't just a herd of cattle or a herd of hogs or a chicken farm or anything else that was going out of business. It was, in fact, a piece of these people's souls that was being lost. The farms that they grew up on, the land that they loved, they were losing it. And the thing about the redemption part of this uh, collection of stories is that many of them found great dignity and a way of bringing their souls back to life in community along these red roads.
You told me just as we were getting set up that I mean, did you take the picture that's on the cover?
Yeah, I took that picture. I took
Tell,
it from the back of a 16 hand racing Arabian stallion by the name of Silver Crescent, who was not at all happy to be paused on the roadway when this is actually part of the racing circuit. He knew it too. You were supposed to be galloping on this circuit until you got to the top of the next hill.
oh man.
So when I paused him to take the photograph, he was uh, indignant with me. Let's put it like that.
And so you raise Arabian horses and breed them, I guess, right?
I raise Arabian and Thoroughbreds, and sometimes we cross them to get what are called Anglos, and sometimes we cross our Arabians with Frisians, and you get something called a turbo, which really goes fast.
Okay. Well, I'd like for you to read an excerpt from the first story that's in that collection of short stories. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on the screen as well, so that when you're reading, people will have a chance to read along, I guess you could say, and that way the people will get a sense of the way you build a scene. There's just incredible detail, and of course we're not going to read the whole story. We'll end on a bit of a cliffhanger, but the floor is yours, ma'am, and I will scroll as you read.
All right, thank you, John. This story is going to join Dickens. The old woman shoved her fist deep into her mouth to stifle the harsh, dry cough. If they heard she was out of her bedroom, they'd come downstairs and put her to bed, scolding her all the while for having disturbed their sleep one more time. She pressed herself hard against the wooden kitchen table until the spasm passed, straining to hear any hint of sound other than her own rasping breath, the constant ringing in her ears, or the winter wind moaning around the corner of the building. When the coughing fit subsided, She shuffled awkwardly toward the mudroom at the back of the house. She entered and closed the door to the kitchen behind her. The hooks on either side of the short vestibule were crowded with winter coats and jackets, rain slickers, and old woolen barn sweaters. The space smelled faintly of Lysol, sweat, and dry manure. A line of barn boots stood in a neat row against the north wall. The old woman struggled into the first jacket at hand, a large, tan canvas jacket with too many pockets. She didn't zip it. Her hands were too crippled and swollen with arthritis to manage something as tiny as a zipper tab. Next, she braced both hands against the wall and one by one plunged each foot, right one always first, then the left, into a pair of mid-calf muck boots. They felt strange with no socks. Before her last stroke, she went out to the barn every day with her little Dickens to visit white socks under her boots. Without socks, they were uncomfortable. Their rough foam inserts scraped her fragile skin, but she guessed it wouldn't be for too long. For a full minute, she stood motionless beside the outside door. Perhaps if she still had her husband, or had different children, this wouldn't seem such a good idea. But she knew what was coming if she acquiesced to her son and daughter-in-law. She had lived through it with her own mother, a lingering death in a nursing home, full of strangers and sickening odors. The mere thought of those smells made acid rise to the back of her throat. She gagged slightly. Her long-dead husband's cane still stood in the far corner, and she reached out to grasp it. It was fitting that something of her sweetheart's should take this journey with her. She opened the door and stumbled down the first step into the cold wind. With a trace of her old orderliness, she turned and carefully pulled the door firmly closed behind her. She was going to join her little Dickens.
Really nice. Whew. It's excellent to read it again and to hear you interpret your own writing that way. Before I became a novelist, I tried to write short stories, figuring that that would be easy, and then if I got published, I would then treat myself to becoming a novelist. Writing short stories, at least for me, is very hard. And so I ended up saying, well, to hell with the short stories. I'm just going to write a novel, which I did. So my question is, I teach writing now, and one of the things that you do that's difficult for me, and I think for a lot of people, is to extract the telling details out of life and put them into the story strategically. So I'd be interested to know, philosophically and in terms of your own writing approach, how you taught yourself to do that.
I think, among other things, that I grew up in a household where you didn't get to talk as often as people might be able to in a household where there's only one or two children and a couple of loving parents. We were 15 of us growing up together, and you either listened to what other people had to say and you either observed them, or you weren't part of the action, so to speak. And so I learned very early that if you wanted to be part of an argument or a discussion, you had to listen to everything everybody else had to say and keep the details of it firmly in mind, or they were just going to roll over you like a steamroller when it came time for you to add your 2 cents to the discussion. Plus, there is something about living in the country, John. If you don't take the time to observe the details of the beauty that surrounds you, it can become a very lonely or a very trying and difficult existence. You have to find all of that beauty in every single day, and that means being observant, seeing the birds, seeing the little animals, watching the clouds, the skies, listening to the neighbors who stop by to talk to you. and finding out what's going on in their lives. So details are simply something that I enjoy, and I admire people who can do it even better than you feel I can, because I trust their writing in a way. It means that they're listeners. It means that they are participants in their own life.
Did you take writing classes, or did this come naturally?
Well, from that from the standpoint of taking writing classes, no, I never took any classes other than those that I probably had in college lit or something like that.
Mhm.
But I'm an attorney, and so what you do is you write briefs, 50, 60, 70, 80 pages of briefs, and then you do findings of fact and conclusions of law, which is to synthesize and condense that entire brief into a one-page document that basically touches on all the highlights and has to also be persuasive. So that was my writing course, was years and years of writing briefs.
So, from what I'm hearing, professionally as a lawyer, there's a certain kind of writing, but growing up in a among 15 preacher's kids, that also allowed you to extract the personal details of life as opposed to just the dry details of the law.
Well, and it wasn't only just extracting the details of life, John. It was finding people who knew how to tell stories. My parents were both storytellers. My father, as a minister, was the best storyteller I ever knew. And between churches, I would sit in his lap and drive the car while he.
Every now and then this happens where the internet freezes, but she'll be right back.
So we lost one another for a second
Yeah,
there.
we did, and I made a note that the internet freezes every now and then, and I apologize for that. Not that I have any control over this.
No, you certainly don't. And since I just acquired internet at my farm last November, I don't even care if it freezes up once in a while. I'm so delighted to have it.
Tell us about growing up as a preacher's kid. What denomination was it, by the way?
My dad was a Lutheran minister, and he had gone to Concordia Seminary in Milwaukee and then to Harvard Divinity School, although he dropped out of Harvard to become a pilot in the Army Air Corps in World War II.
Okay.
And but he flunked kindergarten because they spoke nothing but High German in his household.
Uh-huh.
And by the time he got out of Harvard, he spoke 11 languages, including esoteric languages like Aramaic and Hebrew and of course Latin and Greek. But do you
Right.
think he taught any of his children to speak German? I mean, really?
Well, he wanted you to assimilate, right?
Yes, he certainly did. And my mother, on the other hand, so I have this stoic German Lutheran fifth generation theologian for a father. And he went out and he picked a wild Irish poetess for his wife. And he says he did it very deliberately because he knew his own failings. But there's one problem with the fact that the two of them were so madly in love for the 60, 70 years of their marriage.
Oh my.
They didn't have a lot of time for their kids.
Mhm.
We really were a tribe unto ourselves and pretty much took care of ourselves most of the time.
Uh-huh.
They displayed these wonderful characteristics of what it was to be an adult, but they really weren't as important as they thought in our lives, I don't think.
Let me ask you a personal question. And uh, did any of the German Lutheran faith take root in you? And how do you? Because the term Christian is now so fraught politically and in our society. So I'm interested in knowing A, where you are spiritually and how you would define Christianity as it relates to how it's bantered about in our society.
I suspect that I will never be able to totally disengage myself from the idea that there is something beyond us. If nothing else, having had a historian for a father and a mother, and being a former history major myself, because nobody stays a history major, I don't think. I don't think there is a culture in the world that has been able to survive without longing for and looking for something outside of the frailty of our own condition, something outside of the fallibility of our own condition. And I suspect that I end up there too. I cannot conceive that there isn't some grace or some entity that doesn't, I don't think, it watches over us all on a daily basis or anything like that. But it gives us hope, if nothing else. And I don't think humanity would survive very well without hope.
Do you have a comment on the religious dogmatism that's going on right now in
I
terms
think
of?
it's sad. I think it is sad because it really does boil down to us being kind to one another and listening to that still small voice within. We know it's there, and it works if you strive to listen to it. I don't care whether you call it a conscience or whether you call it the Ten Commandments or the Torah or the Quran or whatever it is. But the truth of the matter is, we know that we are put on this earth to leave it a better place than it was when we came into it. Because to do nothing is to do something. And if there is a balance that needs to be struck between good and evil, if you don't put your finger on the scale on the good side, you are putting it on the scale for evil. And there's
Right.
too much in the world.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that dogmatism and doctrinaire is not your approach to life.
No. I once wrote a story called Cold Mashed Potatoes because, and I learned it very early because we'd sit down at the table and there'd be this beautiful bowl of mashed potatoes, huge bowl, of course. I mean, enormous bowl. And there'd be a big dollop of butter and it would be melting and cascading down the side in golden rivulets. And the steam would be rising. And then Dad would start to talk. And the rule was you couldn't eat until the adults did. I mean, it was just some kind of, more mannerly thing or something. And Dad loved to talk. And of course, we were a captive audience.
Sure.
But he would talk about every single religion in the world. I learned about Buddhism. I learned about the Torah, the Talmud. I learned about all of the great philosophers, all of the great theologians. I learned about Confucius. I learned about Muhammad at the dinner table with my father while those darn mashed potatoes got cold.
That's wonderful. Is it true? It is for me, and it is true for some of the other writer friends that I have, that a lot of our stories are basically us working stuff out. Is that true for you?
Yeah, working stuff out.
Psychology.
Yeah, well, John, I think a lot of it may be stuff you've already worked out. And that somehow you have an inspiration to maybe share it. And I don't know of a better way of sharing anything than with a story. I mean, you, like I'm sure grew up on the great myths, the great legends, and the great stories of our childhood. And we learned lessons through them. And they were easy lessons to learn because everything was so interesting and you were so captivated by it all. The trials and tribulations of Robin Hood or, the Knights of the Round Table or Black Beauty or Little Women or any of it. And so maybe when I'm sharing stories, it's not so much that I'm working through the problem of today. It may well be that I'm trying to entice somebody else into thinking through it with my story.
How do you get your ideas? Can you give us a sense of the process going from idea to blank page to buffed and polished finished product?
Buffed and polished finished project doesn't exist, John. You know better than that. I mean, for heaven's sakes, everything can be revised. But what intrigues me about the way perhaps that my mind works is that I will make some connection in my brain, and my mind will just start picking at it and adding to it and changing it. And I love to watch it evolve. So, for example, I happened to turn on the TV, which I don't get a chance to do much. And here was the Scripps spelling bee, right?
Right.
And these eager little youngsters are up there spelling their hearts out, and I can't spell worth a tinker's damn, pardon my French. I mean, if I didn't have spell check, I'd be lost. But so they asked about a German word called corpsbrüder. And so, I thought, okay, fine. And I started picking that word apart in my head, because etymology was always just a big game with my father, of course, being the linguist that he was. And so pretty soon I went from corpsbrüder to kleiner Bruder, so little brother instead of brother in arms or comrade. And all of a sudden my mind started producing this story. So now I've got a story running around in my head about kleiner Bruder. And I haven't put it down on paper yet, John. So you're the first one to know that there's a story out there called KB.
Do these stories, how frequent, I mean, is this a daily occurrence, a multiple time a day occurrence for you?
Well, I'm lucky if it's a daily occurrence. Very often it's maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and it can be something that someone says, something that I read, something that I see, or I'm walking through the woods with the dogs and something will just pop into my head from something long ago, or something, that is a memory or a recollection. But I have written stories just based upon conversations with other people. And when the book jacket says, listening to neighbors over the paddock fence, it's true. A throwaway comment by somebody can be the genesis of an entire story.
So let's say that you hear something or you have an idea. How soon after that do you sit down and write, and when does that happen?
Very often within 24 hours, I will have basically something in my head that needs to get put down on paper. And it's very, it doesn't have to be sitting at my computer. It can be, a piece of paper. Okay, fine. Got that story started, and then I'll pick it up and flesh it out. But even stories like going to join Dickens, and that was probably one of the first stories that I ever thought should be published or entered in a competition. I must have revised that thing for a year before I sent it off. So.
Mm-hmm. So you have several stories at one time that are in progress, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Have you thought about writing? I'm sorry?
I finished 2 yesterday.
Okay.
One is called Fish Stories, and the other one is called A Fairy Tale Prince. So they couldn't be more dissimilar.
Do you have you thought about writing a novel?
I do have a novel in about the 3rd revision, John.
Okay, so that's something to look forward to. Did the short story writing inform the novel? I mean, did you finally get to the point where you go, "Oh, I can expand this"? Yeah, that's a yes. Absolutely. Okay, nodding vigorously.
Yes, that's a yes.
You're also an administrative law judge currently, right now?
No, no, I've been retired for a number of years.
And what does an administrative law judge do?
An administrative law uh, judge is somebody who articulates and enforces cases relating to administrative law like equal rights and labor standards and things like that. And in fact, that's what I
Okay.
was doing, was labor
Okay.
standards.
And tell us a little bit more about the horse training that you do.
Well, um, I started many, many years ago with an Arabian horse when I moved onto the farm, and basically just had her for pleasure and driving. I taught her how to drive, and I was driving through the hills of Colorado, the foothills, and I saw a sign saying Arabian horses for sale. So of course I pull in the driveway and start talking to the owner, and he's got horses, and his sales list. My Lord, he wanted just thousands and thousands of dollars for these horses. I said, well, why? What makes your horses so good by comparison to my horse? And he said, well, my horses are racehorses. And that was my introduction to the world of Arabian racing. Well, I had had a sister who had been involved in thoroughbred racing, and so I combined the two and started raising and breeding and training both Arab and thoroughbred racehorses. And we raced many, many years quite successfully. I've got a couple of stakes winners. And then I happened to breed a stallion who is one of the rarest Arabian stallions in the world in terms of color. He is, his name is RFR the Iceman, and he's got two sky blue eyes. And that is so rare for an Arabian. It's just a genetic anomaly. And rather than being blue eyes in a face like ours, where you have pink skin around him, his eyes are outlined in black like a pharaoh. I
Oh
mean,
my.
and when you start,
And the internet has frozen again at her northern Wisconsin, but she'll be back any moment now. There she is.
okay. But when I got cancer, I retired from racing and from being a judge, and just kind of retired to the farm. And we did endurance racing instead, which is 25, 50, or 100 miles a day.
Oh my.
And I took one of my race stallions off the track and turned him into an endurance horse. In his first year, he was the Midwest endurance champion. So,
And I would imagine that these experiences make their way into your stories as well.
yes, they certainly do. Yeah.
Now, let's get back to the novel quickly. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is going to be about, or is it too soon to spill the beans on that one?
Well, the working title is just Marathon, but it is Marathon in both the sense of it being a very large county in the state of Wisconsin that is famous for dairy cattle, but it is also a marathon, is a rigorous journey requiring a huge input of energy and absolute dedication. And so it is the story of a family farm that is losing itself to the economies of big business and industrial farming. So
Okay, okay. Which is many of the themes in Red Road Redemption as well, but now expanding it.
yes,
Okay. How can people get in touch with you? Through your website?
the website has a contact, so they can get through to. I'm sorry, they can get to me via that contact information that's on the website. There's a form that allows for people to contact me if they're looking for readings or signings, or just to get a hold of me. Or I don't mind at all if people want to contact me by email. And it's very simple, fullertonwrites@gmail.com.
Excellent.
And I do have to say, John, I'm not addicted to the internet, and I'm not addicted to email, and I don't have an umbilical cord tying me to my phone. So it may be a day or two, but I generally get back to everyone who tries to get in touch with me.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure meeting and talking with you, and I've enjoyed your stories. I'm looking forward to your novel. And is there anything else you want to add?
Well, it's just been a pleasure speaking with you too. It was good to meet you at the conference the other day, and I love your stories. And Lark is just a lark. So
Thank you. Okay. We've been one to one with Pamela Fullerton. I'm John DeDakis, and thank you very much.
you're welcome.